was a Sunday afternoon, and he was at a family barbecue, and Rupert Murdoch was there. And he said, "Hang on a second, I'll just go and have a word to Rupert, and it'll all be fixed." So he says, "I've got no problem with lady pilots. They make very good pilots, but just not in my airline." In March of 1980, the High Court handed down their decision in my favour. So, yeah, game over.
Deborah, thank you so much for being here today. You've been flying for 56 years, if I'm not mistaken. That alone makes you one of the most experienced female airline pilots on the planet, if not the most. You were also the first Australian woman to fly for a major commercial airline. And in researching what is quite evidently an extraordinary journey, I think two things were quite clear to me. One, that you never give up, and two, that you never take no for an answer. What do I or anyone listening need to understand about your early years, your mindset, your family, your context, to make sense of that grit, the determination, and almost stubbornness at times you seem to have from quite a young age?
Yeah, yes. If my parents were to describe me with one word, it would probably be stubborn. So, yes, thank you for that. Um, I have always been stubborn as a child, for whatever reason. If it was to prove that I could do things for my father, I always wanted to swim the fastest, run the fastest, get the highest score in school, you name it. I just wanted to do it as best as possible. Um, by the time I was 14, my father took up flying as a hobby, and I watched him learning his books, trying to work with the radio, do all the radio calls and all those sorts of things. And I helped him with that. Being the eldest child, I was quite close to him, so I became involved in flying in that way, if you like. I got very interested in it, and he decided he would give me 2 lessons for my 16th birthday, and I accepted that offer. And when I turned 16, I started learning to fly, which was probably only a something to I thought might be just a passing phase. I would just go solo, prove that I could do it, then move on to the next thing. But that didn't quite happen that way, because I became very, very excited with flying and loved it and stuck with it, and followed a sort of a career path from 16, if you like, not commercially until I was 21, of course, but um, followed or stuck with flying. So by the time I got to an age where I could start applying to become an airline pilot, I just thought this was a natural progression that I could make. I had no idea that someone or companies would say no to women. That didn't even enter my head. So I guess I arrived at that point thinking there wouldn't be any barriers. I would just have to, as what I've been doing in the past, show or demonstrate that I could do things as well as possible and pass all the tests and all that sort of thing. And then all of a sudden there was this big barrier put in my way, and the stubborn side came out and said, "Well, that's we're not going to put up with that." So I guess that is roughly or that explains how I got there, and then why I stuck to it.
I found a newspaper article actually from August of 1979 from some archives, which stated, and I quote, Deborah attributes her fighting spirit to her grandfather, the late Eddie Ward, Do you think that
Mm.
that still trans true? And could you speak a little bit about what your relationship was like with him?
Yeah, sure. So Eddie Ward was a federal politician in the Labor Party. He was Minister for Transport, Minister for External Territories in the Curtin government. Um, he's my maternal grandfather, and I was the eldest grandchild. So you can imagine I was the favourite, I
Right.
guess you say it like that.
Yeah.
Um,
You're allowed to say it.
so
That's
as
okay.
I'm allowed to say it, yeah. So as young kids, we lived first of all I lived in Sydney, but then we moved to Canberra. So we did a lot of trips to Sydney to see my grandparents. So my grandfather taught me how to play dominoes, taught me how to play cards, all those sorts of things that grandparents, do with their grandkids. And I became very, very close to him. Now he was a extremely competitive man. He made a competition out of absolutely everything and enjoyed it. And that is where I think I got it from. I'm very, very, very competitive. Unfortunately, he passed away when I was only 10. So I would have loved to have spent more time with him. The other thing that he was very adamant about was education, because he had missed out on education when he was younger, and he realised the importance of it, and so he drummed that into not only his daughter, but also into making me see the value of education. So yeah, he was quite an amazing man, really.
He
In
sounds like it.
fact, Yeah, in fact, I was that sentimental about him. I'm actually sitting at his desk, which is over 100 years old. So it belonged to him.
Oh wow. When
And
did you get that desk? Has that been passed down to you now?
it was passed down to me when I was about uh, 25, I think, 25, 26. And I've taken it everywhere with me, including to the other side of the world and back again.
On that note, are there any similar souvenirs that you've taken from your aviation career? You've obviously been flying for more than half a century. Is there anything in particular that you would never let go of if you ever moved or went somewhere else?
Yeah, yeah. I have a Concorde, which is full of cognac. Actually,
Oh,
it's
really?
a China one, made of ceramic Concorde. It's about 30 centimeters long, and I bought it in Paris, and that gets bubble wrapped and hand carried everywhere every time I move as well, and no one's allowed to touch it. So
Right.
that's just my thing about the Concorde. But yeah,
Right. Um,
I've got lots of other memorabilia as well, and I've got logbooks and all that sort of stuff. My logbooks are things that I carry separately too. I don't anything that I always have this rule when you're moving anywhere, anything you absolutely don't want to lose, you can't. You've got to take it on your person.
no, I can understand that. Um,
Mm.
I read somewhere that you used to practice armchair flying at home because you could only afford one lesson a month when you were first trying to get your
Yes.
solo license. Is that right? Doing sort of all the checklists and the procedures despite your mother's wishes.
Yes, yes, that's right. And look, that applies to uh, all throughout a career, a pilot's career. Every time we go to a different aircraft, you get pictures of the overhead panel, pictures of the instrument panel, all that sort of stuff, so that when you are training for that aircraft, you can learn the location of switches, so that when you need to find them, you can find them easier more easily because you know where to look, and roughly where to put your hand in that vicinity of that particular switch or system that you're trying to locate. So it wasn't something that I just did back then. It's something that's gone throughout my whole entire career.
How important do you think that is for new pilots to have that sense of continuous learning? Do you think that that's something you have to carry on throughout your whole career? And do you think it's one of the reasons why you've been so successful in the industry is that you haven't been afraid to keep learning?
Oh, look, I think so. I think that's really correct. You'll see it often where pilots have spent maybe even decades on the same aircraft. They can become very stale. They're not moving with the times, so to in some ways. But so by changing aircraft, by force, I was forced into changing companies because of the pilots dispute. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have. I would have stayed with Ansett till the end of my career. Um, but those changes have been really good for me. It's given me a perspective of different, operators around the world. I've met different people, become involved in flight, very heavily involved in flight safety, and also pilot training. And yeah, so that constant learning process, I think it's really, really, really important.
One of the interesting tidbits that I found was that when you were building up your hours towards your commercial license, you used to take some of your uni friends on
Yeah,
flying safaris around Australia. Could you tell me a bit about
yeah.
those adventures? What do you remember most vividly, and how do you think that shaped your confidence as such a young pilot?
Those flying safaris were a lot of fun, I have to tell you, because there weren't as many rules in those days. So what I had this crazy idea that some friends from uni would, of course, they would want to come on a safari around Australia. Why not? And some of them were crazy enough to do it. So there was my boyfriend at the time. He took one aircraft and I took the other aircraft, and I had five. Well, there's five of us all together in the Cedar Cherokee 6, and we because we had lots of luggage, of course, because we're going for 3 weeks or something. And I planned this whole trip with whack charts on the lounge room floor, plotted, the navigation and all that sort of stuff, because there was no GPS, anything like that. We were all doing it by NDBs and VORs and visual dead reckoning and all that sort of stuff. And we we had planned our itinerary in terms of what places we were going to stop at and what dates though we were going to stop. But for the rest of it, we were pretty flexible. So, and we had to be, because we, for instance, encountered a cyclone in Darwin just before Cyclone Tracy hit. There was another cyclone that happened about 3 weeks before Cyclone Tracy. So sometimes the weather threw spanner in the works, and sometimes one of the aeroplanes blew a cylinder going into Alice Springs. So we had to spend extra days there. So we're on this kind of journey, if you like, around up through the centre of Australia and then all the way down the west coast. But over to Perth and then across the Nullarbor back to Moorabbin in Melbourne. But I think the most important thing about this whole trip, if I'm remembering back, was that over those days and weeks, each one of the people that was with me in that aeroplane, who had no idea about flying beforehand, learned how to navigate, learned how to use the radio, learned how to load the aircraft, learned how to refuel the aircraft, all these sort of things. So they were involved in the whole operation as a team. They weren't just there sitting back for the ride. They were actively engaged in this adventure that we're on. And things like we could land right next to Mayor's Rock or Uluru. There was
Oh wow.
no, uh, yes, there was a little strip beside the rock, and we could land there. So we were right next to it. And those sort of things, in those days, there weren't as many restrictions with where you went and how you flew and all sorts of stuff. Extraordinary experience. The following year, we did a similar safari up the middle again, and then down the east coast of Australia. And we had some interesting experiences on that journey as well. So yeah, it was just a lot of fun, and I'm very grateful to those people that put their faith in me to fly around the country when I was only 21 or 22 or something.
Are you still friends with
Maybe,
some of
yeah,
those people
21,
from the
I
trip?
think. Uh there I think I've lost. The funny thing is I'm still friends with my school friends, but the university friends, I have caught up with some of them through the basketball club, but I think the university friends sort of went all sorts of separate different ways. But um, we did have a basketball reunion about 2 years ago, so caught up with some of them then.
Did you ever get double takes in that time when people realized the pilot was a young woman? Was it quite common at that time, or was it something that you encountered?
No, there was always double takes. And for instance, I used to do a lot of outback flying to opal mines for a friend of my father. So I was collecting boulders from near Quilpie in Queensland and flying them back to uh, Moorabbin. And sometimes I used to just whip up there, take some of the guys up there, and then drop them off and come back on my own. And one time I was coming back on my own and in a twin Comanche, and I landed in Cobar to get fuel. And the refueler came out, and I said, could we fill it up and all that sort of stuff. And the whole time he was looking around for somebody else. And I said, thank you very much, and signed the docket and everything. And he just his jaw dropped, and I just jumped in the airplane, started those engines up, and took off. And I think I left him touching it because for him, this was like so bizarre an event. Yeah, but it was funny. I was very aware that he was looking around trying to find somebody else. So, and I've had another very funny experience. At the flying school at Moorabbin, where I was working there. And it was the year that there was very bad bushfires in Bairnsdale in Victoria. And all the charter companies at Moorabbin had been taken up with the press. So, they're all scrambling to get down there. And I'm just in this flying school. And these guys from, I think it was Channel 7 or The Sun or something like that. Anyway, they come running in the flying school, and they go, we need to charter an aeroplane. We need to charter an aeroplane to go down and check this fire out. And I didn't have any bookings for students at the time. So I went, oh, okay. So I went out and got this aeroplane ready for them and all that sort of stuff, and signed paperwork and everything, and put them inside. And then I got in, and one of the guys said, oh, are you coming too? And I went, yeah, I'm coming too. And then I shut the door, and there was just silence the whole way to Bairnsdale, because they were obviously nervous. So we got to Bairnsdale and we landed there. And I was a bit more conservative than these, charter jocks at the time, and they would want to fly the minimum time, because of the and all that sort of stuff. So we landed, and one of the charter guys came in and landed downwind and crosswind and all sorts of things. And when they did that, the nose wheel snapped off on the aeroplane. So it ended up in a bit of no one was hurt, but the aeroplane was unflyable. So They didn't. The guys in the aircraft just jumped out, took photos of the nose wheel, and then raced off to the fire. But when they all came back, those guys wanted us to take their film back with us because they couldn't get back anymore. And the guys that were with me said, no, 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 we're not taking your film. So we jumped in the airplane and flew back with the film. And of course, they were really happy because now they had a scoop. And not only that, that they got back in one piece. So that was a totally different atmosphere in that aeroplane coming home to going down. Yeah.
I'm sure they were very grateful you were the one flying instead.
Yeah, well, what I learned from that is that it's not about what you say or what you try and prove to somebody or whatever. It's the way you act and conduct yourself and all that sort of stuff that demonstrates to people that you're competent in this particular task, and which speaks far more volumes than saying, yes, I'm qualified, so what's your problem? I've always thought if you can show what you can do, it's much better.
That definitely seems to be a theme that I think is quite evident throughout your career is that from at least from what I can tell from an outsider's perspective, you didn't ever seem to, I guess, complain when people underestimated you. Your solution was always, I'm just going to get it done and then I'll show you. Would you think that that's an accurate way to describe, I
Yeah,
guess, your approach to aviation over the last 50 years?
yeah, I think that's fair. That's fairly accurate. There was, instead of complaining about it, I would just get on with it and do it. And just because I turned up and I just did everything, in those days, I still do it a little bit. You study extra hard because you don't want to be caught out on one little thing, that they can hold against you. So I did try very, very hard. Um, I also had some, I guess, natural ability. I mean, that was told to me that the flying did come naturally to me, so that I was lucky in that respect. But I always thought, if I just turn up here every day and all that sort of stuff, eventually they'll have to get used to me, and they will see that I am doing everything the way it should be done, and that they can have a confidence in my ability. I don't have to tell them anything. I just showed them, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely, it does.
Mm,
Then could you take me through the process of first applying to Ansett? I believe you first applied in 76. How long was
yeah.
it before you had the opportunity to actually interview?
I applied in 76 and they didn't interview me till 78. Um, and that was I think it was 70. Yeah, I'd have to look back, but it was more than nearly 2 years between the application and getting an interview. And that interview, mind you, was just to check the authenticity of the logbooks and license, or nothing more. So I went into Ansett and produced those documents and everything. And oddly enough, they said, okay, we'll have you back for a second interview. Like, they could have stopped there, but they didn't for some reason. I think they wanted to get me off the books because in those days, if you could stall somebody long enough until they turned 7, they didn't recruit anyone over the age of 27. So I think they were waiting for me to get to that age. But um, was yeah, for whatever reason, they said, okay, let's just get her an interviewer and get rid of her. And so I went in for the second interview in July of 1978, and went off to do the psychological test after that, and a medical and all that sort of thing. And that's when the selection panel actually decided that I was suitable for the job. But when the Ansett management discovered what they'd done, they were very distressed about that and decided, they said, no, there's no way we're having women on the flight deck. So that's when the battle started.
What did you do in the 2 years that you were waiting? Is that when you went back to your instructing job? And is there
Oh,
anything that you did during that time
well,
that I guess kept you going?
Well, I was instructing that whole time. So initially I was teaching in high school and instructing on weekends and instructing after school at night time and all that sort of stuff. Like, it was like working 7 days a week, really. And in those days, your application was done by letter. So you'd write a letter, they would answer that letter. So this would be like a monthly process. And they would say, yeah, please update us when you get more hours. I'd send them a new letter. Here you go. I've got another 100 hours or whatever it was. Now, during that period, I decided, oh, this is ridiculous. I better quit teaching and go full-time flying instructing, which is what I did. So I was doing that job the whole time.
Right.
And while I was doing that, I was instructing people that were ending up in the airline. That's how bizarre it was.
Right.
So, yeah.
So how did you expect the rejection letter? Because obviously you went through all of the steps and you obviously ticked every box, the credentials, the flying hours. Was it something you expected given the nature of the times in sort of those years, or is it something that still surprised you given how far you got in the process?
No, I got when I went and did the psychological appraisal, which was an all-day event. The results of that are sent to Ansett in a form of their final recommendation as either not recommended, recommended, or highly recommended. And I was put in the highly recommended category. And although I didn't know it, but one of the employees couldn't help themselves and got in contact with me because they realized the ramifications of this particular test, that every candidate they'd put in the highly recommended category eventually was employed by the airline. So they thought they were seeing the first female pilot coming through. And that phone call was, they shouldn't have made the phone call, but they did. So I was thinking, actually, I've got a really good chance here. I think I might be making it.
Right.
And then the letter turned up. So I was really shocked when the letter said rejected outright.
Particularly because an employee had called you up and said, you've done exceptionally.
Yeah, yeah. That's right. And so the only thing that was maybe an unknown quantity was the interview. But the interview with the six captains, they did not send you to the psychological test unless they were happy with the interview. So there was all these signs or signals that this was going really well. And then all of a sudden the letter arrived and it was all a negative. No, we don't
Right.
want you. Mm.
Take me back to the moment you first went to the Equal Opportunity Board. How soon after the rejection letter did you decide, no, this is not right? I need to do something about it?
Well, I I did the usual tantrum act and, went, well, if they don't want me, that's their bad luck and they're going to miss out and I'll go on to bigger and better things and stuff them basically. But my fiance at the time knew about the Equal Opportunity Act. I didn't know about this act at all. It was relatively new in Victoria. And he said, I think there's some legislation that says you can't discriminate, And I thought, what are you talking about? I'm still in a bad, I'm still angry with the whole thing. And he actually unraveled the letter and then made some inquiries. And I think it was about a week later, we had an appointment to see the Commissioner of Equal Opportunity, and we toddled along to her office, which was quite an amusing thing in itself, the whole exercise. But sat down in front of her and trying to explain to somebody that you think you've been discriminated against without any hard evidence in your hand was really, really difficult. And the only thing I had was that I knew that one of the guys that got selected off the group, out of my group, was less qualified in every single criteria that Ansett used for selection. And he was like a yardstick. So if that person hadn't have been that person in that situation, it would have been a lot more difficult to explain to her, the commissioner, why I thought I had a case. Now, after she met with me, she rang Sir Reginald Ansett anyway and had a conversation with him. And what transpired in that conversation left her in no doubt that there had been discrimination. So that was from there on in. She believed me, and my case was presented before the Equal Opportunity Board. So it was the
How
first.
how privy are you to that conversation? Because I can take a guess as to the kinds of things he said, but I'd love to hear it from you if you ever got an idea from her as to what that conversation went like and what gave her that conviction that
Uh,
definitely something has
uh,
happened here.
I I I don't know the details of the conversation, but there is a conversation on a news item, and one of the news TV one night, where Pamela Graham interviews Reg Ansett when he's trying to get on his helicopter to go back home and work. And he speaks, I think, probably in the similar way he would have spoken to the commissioner. So he says, I've got no problem with lady pilots. They make very good pilots, but just not in my airline. That was his kind of approach. So I think he would have played the safety card, the strength card, or any other cards he could play. He would have just said, women are not suitable for this job. But the thing going against him was that although only a very few, there were a few women in airlines overseas. So that was, yeah, he didn't have, that wasn't an argument. So it's
When
quite
did you hear,
extraordinary when you think about it. When I think about it now, but yeah.
when did you actually hear back from the board? Because I understand that they obviously ruled in your favor, and the only reason I guess it went all the way to the High Court was that Ansett refused to give in and tried to appeal it to the nth degree.
Yeah, well, the first board hearing was terminated because the board didn't act correctly in terms of the legal aspects of it. So that had to be disbanded, and then they formulated a new board, and then the hearing started again. So it was basically heard twice, if you like. Then they ruled in my favour. They passed down 4 orders to Ansett, one of which was that I had to be employed on the next pilot intake. Ansett appealed immediately, and the only court of appeal was the Supreme Court. So they went to the Supreme Court. They lost that first round, I think, there, and then they went again to the Supreme Court, arguing on a point of law between the Equal Opportunity Act and the Airline Pilots Agreement, which was a federal act, or federal award, I should say. And the Supreme Court decreed that they couldn't hear this matter to be heard in the High Court. So that's how it progressed to the High Court.
How involved were you during that process of appeals? Like how quickly is this turned around? Is this something you're thinking about all the time while you're instructing because you know an appeal is happening, or sort of what's the time frame of appeals before it gets to the High Court at that stage?
Well, it was like months between the court hearings, but it's always on your mind because you're preparing for that appeal. Then you go to the appeal, and then a whole bunch of other stuff comes up. So it was very frustrating. I mean, from the time I walked into the the first hearing, which was on the 31st of January 1979, that whole process went right through to October 31st, 1979, which was the High Court hearing. And then the High Court weren't handing down their decision for another 3 months or so, 4 months. They handed their decision down the following March of 1980. But in the meantime, the orders from the Equal Opportunity Board were still valid. So I had to start my training with Ansett in the November of 1979 with a High Court decision hanging over my head that was yet to be made. So any day the High Court could have said, yep, we've made our decision, and yep, Ansett win, and then I would have been out the door. So that was kind of awkward. But as we know, in March of 1980, the High Court handed down their decision in my favour. So, yeah, game over.
How how awkward is that intermediary phase? Because you're obviously going into work every day, you're trying to do your training, you're trying to become the best pilot that you can be. How
Mm.
is it, I guess, how did you approach, I guess, separating that between you doing your pilot's training, but also knowing that this could end any day? How much does that play on your mind when you're trying to just be the best pilot you can?
Yeah, look, I was 100% focused on flying and on learning all the theory and the classroom work and everything like that. Um, During that time, they did try to get rid of me. They trumped up a sort of a safety charge against me, which was completely wrong. It was an incident that had happened at Moorabbin, and yeah, another aircraft cut us off in the circuit, and that guy got very angry with us, and he decided that he would tell Ansett how horrible, uh, how bad I was as a pilot. And then they said, "Oh, we've got something on her now. We're going to get rid of her because she's unsafe." And they desperately tried to do that during that December of 1979. But they failed in that attempt because the pilots union came in and helped me through that. But not only that, they didn't realise that I had a proof that I was not at fault. So that was something that Ansett did the whole way through. They just assumed that they could get away with it. They didn't come in prepared with anything properly. They just assumed that because they're a big company and they made the rules in those days, that they didn't need to prove stuff. So um, when they were quite gobsmacked when I said, "Well, I've got here some written proof that um, that the other pilot was at fault," and so they tried all of this until the management changed in December of 1979, and Rupert Murdoch and Sir Peter Abels took over the company. And Reg Ansett was basically deposed from his throne, if you like. And um, yeah, the whole attitude of the company had to change, or started to change.
There's an interesting story there because I read that you had actually taught Rupert Murdoch's brother-in-law at the time, and you had phoned him up to, I guess, get his assistance in changing how you were treated at Ansett. Could you tell that story? How did that go?
Yeah, well, that was in the December when I was in ground school, and uh, you could see like the people that were running the classes and everything were amazing. They were so helpful and so supportive. It was the management level that were being the obstructionists, and you could see they were desperately clutching at straws at anything to do Sir Reginald Dancer's wishes. You know, he didn't want me in an aeroplane, so that's the way it was going to be. And so the rumors started flying around. They said, "Oh, you're never going to get in an aeroplane. They'll let you do this, this, and this, but they'll never let you put foot in an aeroplane." And gradually, my colleagues from the classroom were going off and moving onto the aircraft and starting to learn to fly the Fokker. And I thought, oh, well, I'm being left behind. So, and I was left behind with two other guys. And it was very convenient because once they got rid of me, then they were a pair, a training pair, and they'd be fine. So it was obvious what they were up to. So I decided to call John Calvert Jones, who I'd taught to fly, who happens to be Rupert Murdoch's brother in law. And I said to him what was going on. And he, at that, was a Sunday afternoon, and he was at a family barbecue, and Rupert Murdoch was there. And he said, "Hang on a second, I'll just go and have a word to Rupert, and it'll all be fixed." And sure enough, the following Tuesday, there was a memo issued by Rupert Murdoch to all the management guys that I was to be treated the same as all the other candidates. So that was very progressive of him and very wise.
How vindicating was that, given the circumstances of Sir, Reg Ansett had just been, taken out of his position, and the company had been taken over, and then sort of in quite quick succession, you get, I guess, the validation that you will get to train like everyone else. How vindicating was that in that moment? And did that almost feel like half the victory before the High Court ruling had even come down at that point?
No, the High Court ruling was still hanging over my head because if I had have lost in the High Court, yeah, then I would have been employed under sufferance, I guess, if they kept me on. But so that was, yeah, the longer I was there, the more confident I was that I would stay, but certainly not in the beginning. It was quite a while before that happened. But Reg Ansett that entire year had been making mistakes and bad investments and shares and all that sort of shit was going on. So he was actually on the way out anyway. But um, I think it was like there's no doubt. I mean, it's been written in books that I was a thorn in his side and didn't help with, he was distracted by my case when he should have had his eye on his investments, let's say, put it that way. Mm.
Right. I saw somewhere that you actually did attend or either one of or the High Court hearing, and that, as you would expect, Ansett had, lawyers from every different state, for the respective where they had equal opportunity acts, and that your lawyer was about 10 minutes late, and so you were there by yourself for 10 minutes, sweating and waiting, not
Mm.
sure what was going to happen. Can you drop us in that moment? What was that like? I guess not having any legal background, and just sort of being there in the High Court around all these silks and barristers and things like that.
There were so many barristers and QCs and you name it. They weren't just Ansett's team. Ansett had about 10 of them, but every state, like South Australia, Tasmania, they sent legal representatives because this was testing the Victorian Equal Opportunity Law. And if this case fell through, it jeopardised the laws in other states. So that's why they were all there, like interested observers, if you like. So it was very daunting being in that courtroom. And then my barrister, who had been with him the whole way through, suddenly isn't there. and he got caught up in a taxi and he was running late, and you know, there's lots of coughing and all this sort of thing and shuffling around and looking at watches and all that. And I thought, my God, this is all gonna be thrown out. But he came racing in at the last minute with his robe flying behind him and the wig half on and all that sort of stuff. And he was absolutely brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And once again, Ansett had gone into that courtroom without the sufficient paperwork or documents to substantiate their case, because they were arguing, for example, that the airline pilots award or agreement was federal and therefore it overruled state law. But they had failed to notice that that award was written completely in the male tense, for example. So they were talking about an award that only applied to men in writing. I mean, you know, in the end, it applies to men and women, but it was only written in the male tense. They didn't seem to think that was a problem. But one of the High Court judges pulled them up immediately. And, you know, there were several moments in that hearing where we thought it was going to get thrown out because Ansett had just been so arrogant in their approach and hadn't done their research properly.
Was it just that one day that you attended for the hearing, or how long was this process
Uh,
before
that
the court
was
deliberated?
2 It was 2 days, and then it was several months before they handed their finding down. Yeah.
Right. And on a slightly different perspective to that, what is this like? This whole process obviously spans sort of a year, year and a half. What does that process look like financially? Is it expensive to, I guess, support yourself during that process in terms of the appeals and the high court proceedings? How did you manage, I guess, that aspect of it?
Well, if I was trying to do something like this today, I don't know how I'd do it, financially, that is. But at the time that my barrister waived his fees until the end. So I think he was thinking, you know, I'll get a lump sum payout or damages or something like that, and his fees will come out of that, which they did, which is what happened. Um, and I had a lawyer friend of mine who and was with me in the beginning, and she did everything for nothing. She just said, "I'm coming along on this journey, and I'm prepared to do this with you for nothing." So that was quite amazing. I was very, very lucky in that respect. And then there were some other women's groups who raised funds, not only for me, but for also for any other women in the future that might find themselves in a position where they need to fight it legally, but they don't have the resources to do so. So that was what happened back then. But relatively speaking, I think legal costs these days would be a lot higher.
I read somewhere that there was also on the 1 year anniversary of when you should have started with Ansett, there was about 100 people who protested outside of their city terminal. On that note, and I guess the lawyers and the barristers who assisted you during that time, pro bono, how important was that kind of support? Was there anyone else who really helped you throughout this process, whether it's emotionally, financially? How important was that support network for you in this process?
Yeah, that was really important. I mean, I couldn't really get involved in it myself because I had to distance myself from anything like that. But those demonstrations and boycotts and things like that were amazing. I had the emotional support, like my family were terrific, and friends. My friends were amazing as well. But uh, in the end, as it dragged on, you know, there were fewer and fewer people by my side to help in terms of personally speaking, but the the wave started in the general public that became stronger. So it was quite difficult at the time.
You had a moment at Ansett, I heard, when you felt finally accepted as one of them. And I'm specifically referring to the annual retirement dinners put up by the flight engineers. I'd love to hear that story from you because I think it's a really, really good one.
Yeah. So I'd been in Ansett for about 4 years, and I was on the 737, which doesn't have a flight engineer. The flight engineers were on the 727, and they were a pretty rowdy lot, but they were the social directors of the flight crew, and they had a committee that organised this retirement dinner every year. And what happened there was all the pilots that had retired throughout the year were gathered in this dinner, and past retirees and current pilots and everything could all come along and listen to their stories and send them out on a good note. The flight engineers organised the invitations, and this event was strictly men only, absolutely men only, and the reason for that was that they felt that the guys wouldn't be able to tell their war stories if their wives were there, if their girlfriends and wives were there, or what have you. You know what I mean? So they said no. In order for the guys to speak freely, no women. And then one year, which was about after I'd been in there for 4 years, they said, "You're invited." And I went, "Really?" And they said, "Yeah, because we think you're one of us." So I was the guardian of their stories, in other words. So I went along to this dinner, and there were several hundred. I mean, it was a big event, and it was black tie, and I wore a long evening dress. And when I walked in, you can imagine amongst 300 or so guys in dinner suits. And it was the old guys that had retired many years beforehand who wanted me to sit at their table, because they said, "We didn't have anybody like you when we were flying, so we want you to sit at our table." So they were really sweet.
So you were the only woman in that entire room in terms of
Yep.
the staff and things?
Yep. Yep.
Was that, do you think that was the pinch me moment? Is that for you the point of you felt truly accepted and that is, I guess, what you keep
Yeah.
the most fond memory of?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. It was like a real statement to say, yeah, you have actually proven that you're one of us. And I think that's what I was saying to you before, that I never went, "Well, it's not fair that I can't go to this dinner," or anything like that. I wouldn't dream of it. But to get that invitation when I did, it was just really lovely. And it was good fun. I mean, I had a good night.
I'm sure. There's, I think on that point, I think one of the most pieces of poetic justice that I think I loved when I was looking into your story was the recent flyover that was named after you at Sydney Airport. Could you
Yeah.
tell the story of when you got that phone call and when you found out that it would obviously go over the Sir Reg Ansett Drive?
Well, I was aware. I'm with Virgin at the moment, so I'm based in Sydney, and sometimes I walk to work, and I walked under this construction as it was being in the last, few months and so forth of its building. And so I watched the progression of it, and I thought, "Oh, this is interesting." And that was about the end of my interest in it at that time. And then I got a phone call from Sydney Airport, a guy from Sydney Airport, um, and I thought, "Oh, why does he want to speak to me?" I mean, I thought I've done something wrong or something. Anyway, they had the naming rights of this particular flyover, and it was almost completed. And they decided that their committee decided they were going to name it after me, because they had nothing on the airport named after a woman, and they felt that this was appropriate, and particularly they were uh, chuffed by the reason that it went over the top of Sir Reginald Ansett Drive, which is a small side road that comes in under this flyover. And they had to get my permission, though, so they had to call me. And I thought it was a hoax. I thought they were, some dude was playing a trick on me. And then when I realized that it was actually that was actually happening, or that was true, I was absolutely so excited. And the next time I walked to work, I stopped and I took lots of photos and um, all that sort of stuff. So I have to say, every time I look at it, I just have a big grin on my face. I just go, yep. And besides, it's very nice. It's especially at night when it's lit up. It's very, very nice.
Is there any other achievements? Because I think that I would consider that one of the biggest ones. But are there any other achievements that you had in your very, very long career and still going that you're most proud of?
I think what I'm most proud of is the feedback that I've got along the way, especially from people who I've taught and or instructed, not just in general aviation, but also in the airline. And the positive feedback I get from those people is, and just the respect that I get, I think that is the best thing for me.
One of the last things that I really wanted to ask you about when I saw was that you did a lot of air racing earlier in your career. I'd love to hear about that.
Well, air racing, yeah, that was it's very special because they're in the days when there's not the fuel wasn't expensive and all that sort of thing, and it was a bit extravagant in a way, but it was a lot of fun, and you learnt very very quickly the limitations of the aircraft and how to fly the fastest and uh, all that sort of stuff, as well as the same time not burning excessive amount of fuel and navigating accurately. Um, but yeah, I went in several air races. Again, that was, I have to say, it's my competitive side coming out, but how could I resist that? So yeah, but they were a lot of fun.
And did you win any trophies? Are you competing against people?
I have got an odd trophy or two in my cabinet. Yes. Yeah, yeah, I did.
Just to wrap up, I have a few rapid fire questions that I wanted to run past you. I want to ask,
Mhm.
what do you think is your most terrifying moment being in the cockpit?
Oh, flying over the North Sea between Amsterdam and Stavanger in Norway, when both of our engines iced up because the engine anti-icing failed. So I was convinced we were going down into the North Sea that particular night. So yeah, but that's a long explanation of it. Well, it would take me quite a long time to explain why it happened, but it was terrifying. So that's number one on my list.
On the flip, what would you consider the most beautiful place that you ever landed on as a pilot?
Sydney, we're going anytime going into Sydney. I just never get tired of the looking at Sydney Harbour and the Opera House and the Harbour Bridge. Just spectacular. Sydney takes the prize there. One of the most beautiful things I've seen is the early morning sun on the snow on the New Zealand Alps on the southern island, uh, which puts the very lovely shade of pink on the snow. So it was really lovely. So that's yeah. So the other things have been the Northern Lights, the Aurora Australis, those sort of things have been pretty spectacular.
Have you seen that while flying?
Yes, 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 yes. Yeah, the Aurora Australis was amazing, absolutely amazing. It was one night back in the early 80s when I was on the 737. And I've seen the Northern Lights several times crossing the Atlantic when I was flying with KLM.
That sounds beautiful.
Mm.
Last question for you. If you,
Hmm.
practicalities aside, if you could hypothetically pick any airline, any route, and any aircraft to fly, what would be your dream final flight?
Oh my! Dream final flight. Yes. I always wanted to fly the 727 from the left seat. So I would have to go back to the 727 and which is really crazy, but that's the way it is. Because I would love to fly that from the left seat and have that flight engineer and co-pilot there, and I think that would just be amazing to go back to those days. The airline I would like to do it in would probably be KLM. So, I mean, a fantastic legacy airline. And yeah, I'd probably want to fly that into Sydney. Mm,
That sounds amazing. Well,
yeah,
thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time.
that's all right. It's a pleasure.